Suspiria is a 1977 Italian horror film directed by Dario Argento. Considered to be one of the seminal works of the giallo genre, a collection of Italian films made throughout the 1960s and 70s, characterized by their use of vivid colors, graphic depictions of sex and/or violence, as well as typical slasher elements. These films would go on to inspire the American slasher films of the 1980s, as well as art cinema to this day. Suspiria, unofficially inspired by Thomas de Quincey's 1845 essay Susperia du Profundis, tells the story of Susie, a young dancer from New York who travels to Germany to enroll in a famed dance school. Upon the night of her arrival, one of the students of the academy is brutally murdered. And as Susie attempts to acclimate to life at the school, more students and staff are murdered by a mysterious, unseen entity in increasingly gruesome ways. Though this sounds like your typical graphic horror fare, there are two elements that differentiate it as a rather unique work. First, the entity committing these murders is not a singular masculine figure, but rather a collection of women. And the second thing is, they're witches. In this presentation, I will build off Cynthia Freeland's cognitivist framework for talking about slashers as monsters, how graphic horror helps us to better understand the morality of evil, and how these concepts function within Susperia, especially in relation to gender. Many people view graphic horror movies such as Susperia as excessive depictions of mindless violence. However, these films serve an important role. By symbolically representing evil, they allow us to, as Freeland puts it, meditate on death and the limitations of the flesh. In some cases, these films help us to understand the nature of evil and how it functions in the real world. While Susperia does not meet Freeland's definition of a slasher movie wherein a psychopathic killer, usually male, whose assumed bloodlust drives him to a sort of extreme violence, for the first half of this film, the viewer is led to believe that the monster is a naturalistic male human. The first number of this film is a 4-minute graphic spectacle where we see one of the young dancers being stabbed over and over. We see the knife cut through her heart repeatedly. The number commences with the victim falling through the glass ceiling of the school and hanging by a cord around her neck. All we see of the killer is a male-coded hand and arm. The excessive violence on a woman at the hands of a man plays into the audience's expectation of a horror film, leading one to believe there is a realistic explanation for these killings, which in turn evokes an ambivalent thrill for the audience in every following scene where a female character in a predominantly female cast interacts with one of the 3 male characters. The second number is where things change. The blind pianist who works at the ballet school is walking home with the help of his guide dog. When he reaches the center of an empty city square, he stops, believing someone is there. Rather than the slasher carrying out this next kill, his guide dog, suddenly possessed, starts tearing into the man's flesh. In both these scenes, we watch flesh being penetrated, torn, eaten in excruciating detail. The graphic element of this horror is important in not only moving the plot forward, but in also prompting the viewer to learn about the killer. Question the killer's intentions, how its victims are chosen, and why. I believe that the contrast between these two murders, both in the depiction of the murder and the choice of victim, leads the viewer to ponder different explanations and in turn prompting the viewer to understand evil as omnipresent. In this sudden realization, the malevolent force behind these murders is unknowable. This, in conjunction with the excess of graphic violence of the flesh, could propel viewers into a realm of thought and understanding of evil that Freeland calls the perverse sublime. For Freeland, we can find the sublime in horror when the non-stop visions of blood and gore become something so huge and vast that it overwhelms the rational self. In the case of Susperia, due to the fact that the evil presence remains unseen for the vast majority of the film, the camera's revelry in capturing the violence of these deaths, paired with the absence of a knowable aggressor, allows the audience to solely focus on the destruction of the body. Further, the violence is highly aestheticized, which heightens the participatory celebration of evil while also providing visual pleasure. Specifically, looking at the aestheticization of the blood in the film allows the viewer to revel in the beauty of violence while creating enough cognitive distance from reality. Freeland argues that an important function of graphic horror is to better understand the function of evil. In the final scene in Susperia, the source of evil is revealed. Susie gains access to the witch's secret lair and sees firsthand the power they possess and the reason behind their murderous actions. We learn that the witches will kill anyone who they believe could threaten their never-ending quest for power and money. In the final meeting between Susie and the Coven, it culminates in a last battle of evil force and good. Helena Marcos, the head of the witches' coven, is exposed as the ultimate representation of evil. Interestingly, she has the power to be invisible. Marcos uses Susie's dead friend's body to try to kill her. Susie stabs the invisible witch, in turn killing the entire coven. In this act of survival, Susie becomes the slasher herself. And the film ends with her fleeing the burning dance school as she laughs, now free from the evils the buildings held within its walls. In the 2018 remake of the film, this climactic confrontation is heightened as Susie's body transforms and she embraces her latent connection to magic that has been dormant within her throughout the film. I mentioned the remake and the way in which it changes this final sequence because it visualizes what the original film only implies. That in order for the horror victim to defeat the evilness she faces, she must embrace violence and in turn become the slasher herself. In the climactic sequence from the remake, we watch as Susie, wielding insurmountable magical power, decimates the evil-doing witches of the Coven. As they explode with a single look, she then offers a peaceful death to her fellow dance students who experience death at the hands of the witches. In doing so, she becomes the human embodiment of both the grotesque and the sublime.